Tonight, I have the real honor and privilege of introducing an amazing public servant, a lawyer, an educator, an author, a political commentator, and a good friend, the Honorable Jennifer Granholm.
Joan Bauer. Joan is the greatest. This speaker series is so lucky. I mean, Mark Odland, where are you, Mark? I know you're back there somewhere. And Joan Bauer and the rest, so awesome. They want to make this the best speakers series in the history of speaker series. So it's nice to be here. And Joan, I mean, because she and I served at the same time, she was in the state legislature during this, unbelievably horrible economic time in Michigan. You can thank Joan every time you go into a restaurant and it's smoke-free, because Joan Bauer was responsible for that. So here I am. I'm so glad to be home. Home in Michigan. I say that because some of you may know, that after I was done being governor, I moved to be near my parents. My parents lived in the Bay Area, and my dad's had now 3 strokes, and so I was the child who could be in the vicinity to be near them. So it's been great to be near them, but I miss it so much. And I'm so excited to be able to accept this invitation because it's on the lake and this beautiful weekend, and it's just, so you're so lucky to be here permanent, or some of you are here permanently, some of you are here during the good months. All months are good months, I know, but some are better than others, and so I thank you very much for the great gift of being able to come back to the lake. I wanted to talk with you about some of the stuff that I'm learning, and as it affects Michigan, because my soul was seared from being governor during this really challenging time. And when I went to the Bay Area, and of course that's where Silicon Valley is, and learning so much about the nexus between technology and artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles and what we are going through in terms of changing the workforce, that's sort of what I wanted to talk with you about from a former governor's perspective, but mostly from somebody who lived with you all through this incredibly challenging time. So when I say top trends affecting Michigan, it really involves that. Where are we going from an economic and technology perspective? So if I asked you what the #1 issue in the country is according to all surveys, what would they say? Oh, that's so interesting. You all say climate change. Health would be top. Health would be the second. Climate change has moved up, but it's actually not the top issue. It's actually the economy. Believe it or not, it's still the economy, stupid. So, and I'm not calling you stupid. I'm just using that expression, So the Pew Research Center does this every single year, where they canvass thousands of people and find out what America is thinking, right? So, for example, reducing crime is top for about 50%, 51% say immigration, but the economy say by far it's 70%. Health would be second at 69%. So it's still a huge deal. It's different though, right? Because the economy has changed than when we had such a high unemployment rate because of the loss of manufacturing jobs. It was all about having jobs, getting jobs, right? But the economy's changed. It's a slightly different focus on what the economy stupid means, right? So I talk about Greenville all the time, and I apologize, Joan, because I know you've heard me tell this story, but for those of you who need to be reminded I'm going to remind you of it because it was so impactful for me. So I was elected as they said in 2002, took office in 2003. The nation was going through a national recession back then, and George Bush was president. And, in Michigan, the whole notion has always been, when the nation catches a cold, Michigan catches pneumonia, right? But when we come out of a recession, there's pent-up demand for vehicles, the products that we make. And so we usually do better than the national average because people start buying cars again and they've held off not buying them. So when I was coming into office, we were at the tail end of the recession, and my advisors were all like, wow, this is a great time to come in, because even though the unemployment rate is a little bit high, by the end of the first year, this is what the economists were saying, we're going to start to see jobs creating hand over fist, and you as governor will get the credit. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, that's good serendipity. So at the end of the first year, lo and behold, we weren't creating jobs hand over fist. And I got a call from the guy who's the head of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation at the time, and he said, Gov, we got a big problem. I said, what? He said, there is a little tiny town in Michigan, Greenville, and Greenville has 8,000 residents. Greenville also has the largest refrigerator factory in North America, and they're going to close and go to Mexico. And I said, well, how many people work at the plant? And he said, about 3,000. So in a town of 8,000, that's like a one-company town, right? You can imagine if you take out the kids and the grandparents, everybody was either working at Electrolux or at a supplier to Electrolux. So in Greenville, in fact, they proudly said that they were the refrigerator capital of North America, because it was, in fact, the largest refrigerator factory in North America. So I said, new governor, there is no way we're going to let this happen. I am going to bring my cabinet to Greenville, and we will make Electrolux an offer they can't refuse. So, not like the mafia, but I mean like tax incentives and stuff like that. So I did. We brought our whole cabinet to Greenville, and this is what, Electrolux was going to go to Juarez, Mexico, and we said, okay, we were in Greenville City Hall. Greenville City Hall is about the size of like 3 of these panels. And, but every muckety-muck from Greenville was there. Like the mayor was there, the head of the city council was there, the head of the community college was there, the head of the UAW who represented the workforce. Everybody was there around this square table. And we all get in, and my whole cabinet came in, and we basically made, if you're a poker player, right? We made a pile of chips, and we slid our pile across the table to the management of Electrolux, and in this pile of chips were things like 0 taxes for 20 years, and we would help to build them a new factory because the factory was getting old and decrepit, and we were going to help to retrain the workers, and the UAW was going to give such an amount in concessions that they didn't even want anyone to know how much they were willing to sacrifice to keep those jobs, so they wanted to really keep it under cover. We gave them a huge amount. So Electrolux takes, the chip pile was a metaphor. They took our list of incentives and they went outside the room for 17 minutes, and they come back in and they said, wow, this is the most generous any community has ever been in trying to keep jobs. But there's nothing you can do to combat the fact that we can pay $1.57 an hour in Juarez, Mexico, so we're going to go. There's nothing you can do. When this happened, it was like a bomb blew up in Greenville. And I felt like such a failure because I wasn't able to prevent this factory from leaving. And on the month that the last refrigerator came off the assembly line, the employees, this is a picture of a guy on the last day leaving. The employees had a gathering at Clackle's Orchard Pavilion, which is a pavilion in Greenville, and it was called The Last Supper. It was like a huge community wake, right? A grieving. And I wasn't invited, but I went. And I go in, and there is, everybody's sitting around 8 top tables, and they're eating out of box lunches, and there's a band playing sad music, a sad band. But I go up to the first table, and this guy stands up, and he's got his tiger cap on backwards, he's got tattoos. He says to me, he says, Governor, come here. And I'm, okay. And he says, I want you to meet my daughters. They were young teenagers. And he pulls them up. He says, I want you to know that I have worked at this factory for 30 years. I'm 48 years old. I went from high school to factory. He said, my father worked at this factory. My grandfather worked at this factory. All I know, he said, is how to make refrigerators. And then he looks at his girls and he puts his hand on his chest like this. So, Gov, tell me, who is ever going to hire me? Who's ever going to hire me? And that question was asked by everybody in Clackle's Orchard Pavilion that day. And it's been asked by everyone across the country who has lost jobs in factories as a result of trade agreements and globalization. This is a picture of the Greenville factory being imploded. And this is a picture of the beautiful new factory in Juarez, Mexico, where it went. Greenville wasn't alone. 70,000 factories were closed in the US in the first 17 years of this century. 17,000 communities like Greenville, including a lot in Michigan. And those hulking factories or the vacant space where they have been imploded sit on main streets across America as reminders about the loss of these jobs due to what many people view as unfair trade and trade agreements that have seen the global shift in manufacturing jobs. So you wonder why Donald Trump was elected. It was because he was talking about this. It really was. And so if you go beyond Greenville, though, this is still happening, right? I mean, the strike that's happening with General Motors is because of the closed plants. And some of that closing of plants is as a result of NAFTA and movement of the Chevy Blazer to Mexico, et cetera. But some of it is about something else. And of course, many of you know this story, that in the second decade of this century, things started to change a bit about why job shifting was happening away from manufacturing. Many of you know, all of Trump's tweets about globalization all involved the trade agreements. In fact, when I was campaigning here, NAFTA and CAFTA have given us the shafta. That was my line, because not that we're not afraid of trade. It's just that they had been enforced poorly, and we were giving away the store on behalf of, the brass, but not the people who were working at the companies. But here's what's happening now, is that globalization maybe is accountable for about 13% of the job losses. But now it's automation. Almost 88% of job shifts and losses now is a result of technology on the floor of the factory, right? You're seeing it's easier to campaign against China than it is to campaign against robots. So a lot of political people, and I will call us out on this, are always saying, it's about China, but so much more of it really now is about automation. So we are seeing that this downward spiral is the number of manufacturing employees, and the upward spiral, the upward graph, is about productivity increases. Those productivity increases are due largely to being able to deploy technology on the floor of the factory. So this poll, there was a poll that was done after the 2016 election, and they asked this question. Would you rather work full-time? This is let me just say, the people they were asking this to were blue-collar Midwestern workers, okay? Blue-collar Midwestern workers. Would you rather work full-time in a good-paying factory job or full-time in a salaried office job? What do you think they said? You saw the poll. 72% said they would prefer to work in a factory job, and 28% in a salaried office job. And those are the factory jobs are the ones leaving. So what does this mean for us? Because there are a lot of people who like to build things and work with their hands, right? And what do you do when you're seeing so much of that go away? So there's a whole series of studies that have happened recently talking about how the robots are going to take our jobs, automation to displace 20 to 25% of workers by 2030. McKinsey finds automation could eradicate a third of the workforce. Shock report, machines will do half our labor in less than 8 years. This is why you're seeing like Andrew Yang talk about the universal basic income, right? Because of these kind of reports that are freaking people out. And so the question is, really, what is happening underneath, and is it all that bad? So I want to talk about a couple of trends. One is autonomous vehicles. Let me just premise this whole conversation by saying, despite all this horrible news, I'm actually really bullish on technology. I really am. I think it's going to be cool. So, autonomous vehicles, if you were investing, if you had money to put in the stock market, I would say find a platform for autonomous vehicles and invest in that, because it's going to be a total game changer. And I want to tell you what some of the folks in Silicon Valley are thinking about. So, say you want to get to New York tomorrow, and you call up your autonomous vehicle, and it's a little motel on wheels, and you just drive, you wake up in New York. Hello, it's an 11-hour drive, right? You've got your sink, you've got your toilet, you've got your guitar, you sleep. I kind of think this was photoshopped because I think those are high heels and pink suits, and I think that's a guy. Who knows? Maybe, he lives in a non-binary world, but nonetheless, you can imagine all sorts of interesting business opportunities with autonomous vehicles. This is super easy. We see movies in cars all the time, right? But there's just no driver in this one. I'm going to try to see if I can play this. This is a small delivery, delivery as a service. We'll see if this works. There may be a slight delay on it, but we're going to try it because we tried it earlier, and it should. But there's all sorts of applications happening with respect to technology. This is being downloaded from the web, so it's got to do a little bit of a thing. Driverless car designed to do your chores, your errands for you. This is just one example of a vehicle. You can imagine it's pizza, it's taking all this stuff, its compartments can deliver everything. It can only make local trips. It's a small little thing. You can't, unlike Waymo, which is Google's autonomous vehicle technology, this one is only going locally. So all this stuff gets delivered just right to your door. This one is for food delivery. Anybody on a campus lately, I don't know if it's happening here at the high school, but I bet you it's happening at Grand Valley, the little small delivery robots that are, giving pizza to hungry kids in the dorms. So the question is for us, can you imagine a business proposition related to that? Yes, you probably could. This for areas where you've got a lot of density and a lot of expense, people are rethinking city planning. And so, for example, in California, you could fit the entire city of San Francisco inside of Los Angeles's surface parking lots. The entire city. So in a state like California, or in cities like Chicago, where you've got a high cost of living in many areas, they're talking about building on top of parking lots, and part of the perks of the apartments is that the apartment will have its own suite of autonomous vehicles available to residents to be able to use, but they don't need to have cars at all. So you have to think about rethinking parking lots if people are going to be using autonomous vehicles to actually drive in. You could think about rethinking the curb space. Maybe you don't need parking lanes anymore, and so you expand retail and restaurant opportunities. Rethinking the garage for many, redoing the garages if people don't need cars anymore, then what's all that space is going to be doing? You could make little apartments for that. You'd see 38,000 fewer deaths per year, assuming the technology gets fully developed, which is a big assumption. I know you're laughing about that, but there is a lot of research that's being done about how the vehicles with LiDAR, radar, etc., that they are actually safer once they get it all together than vehicles that you might drive. There's $200 billion a year being spent on auto insurance that you wouldn't have to pay. All of that's potentially positive, but what about the driver jobs, right? There's a lot of people who make a living driving, and the numbers are pretty stark. So how many truck drivers are there? 1.7 million. How many taxi drivers? Another 1.7 million. What's going to happen to those jobs? About 5 million jobs of people driving altogether. Bless you. So Lawrence Katz of Harvard says it's about the same size as the decline in manufacturing jobs. The same kind of economic shock would happen if all those displaced people ended up without a job. In fact, Uber, this is from like 2 years ago now, Otto was delivering 50,000 beers. As an example, the truck industry loves the notion of having autonomous trucks. Do you think there's really nobody in this truck full of beer? There is somebody going to be in there. It's probably somebody in the back, not drinking the beer, but guarding the beer, right? They're going to have, it's maybe it's a different kind of job. Even Electrolux is driving refrigerators using autonomous technology. They're experimenting with it as well. So I want to share with you a study that came out of Stanford, near a group near Stanford called Rethinking Transportation. And to me, it's very aggressive, this study. It's not going to happen exactly as they described, but I want you to think about how this might happen. So this is done by Tony Seba, and I fully attribute all of the stuff you're about to see to him. So this point is that it is going to happen quickly. So this is a city street in New York City, 1900, and the question is, can you spot the car in this particular scene? Those are all horse-drawn carriages. There is the vehicle. 13 years later, can you spot the horse? 13 years later. That was a disruption, that technology, the vehicle, right? And it happened fast. And this was in an era, right, where we didn't have cell phones or anything like that. So the question for us is, how quickly is this going to happen? Again, assuming the technology works out. And the technology needs to have a lot of cooperation in cities, et cetera, to make it happen. But the vehicle technology itself is going to happen more readily, perhaps, than all of the planning around autonomous vehicles. But here are the legislatures that have passed something related to autonomous vehicles and allowing experimentation. Michigan is one of those places. In fact, Michigan is on the cutting edge because they've got a whole group around Ann Arbor and in southwest Detroit that are focused on this. But this is, I think, one of the facts out of this study that really blew my mind. 2020, there's going to be 247 million cars on the road, but by 2030, assuming that there is an uptake in autonomous vehicles, there'll be 44 million cars on the road. So imagine what that means. Imagine what that means for the automakers, right? 95% of miles will be traveled on transportation as a service platform. So that's like Uber, Lyft, but there's not a driver, right? So the car just comes to you. You have your app. You say, I'm going to go to the grocery store. There are cars that are in your vicinity. They come pick you up. They take you to the grocery store. They take you home. There's no driver. Transportation as a service, TaaS is what it's called, or mobility as a service in some places. The cost is why this is going to happen so quickly. By 2030, traveling via transportation as a service, electric autonomous vehicles will be massively cheaper than by your individually owned internal combustion engine car, your regular old car. So this is the money shot to me. So if you have a new IO means individually owned, your own car. ICE is internal combustion engine. The green stands for 2020. You pay 65 cents a mile using your car, on average. This is a national average. By 2030, your individual car, if it's an internal combustion engine, will cost 75 cents a mile. If you have an autonomous EV, electric vehicle, and they'll all be electric, by 2020, it's 16 cents a mile. 2030, it's 10 cents a mile. And if you have it as a pool, 5 cents a mile in 2020, 3 cents a mile in 2030. That is disruption right there. If it happens like that, that is a massive sea change. And what does it mean, right? For communities, for low-income workers, for places, maybe you would see cities like South Haven saying, everybody who lives here Or we'll give a break to seniors. We'll give you a pass that allows you just to use for free autonomous vehicles. You can imagine disability communities really seeing an opportunity here, certainly low-income workers who live a distance. You can see employers giving as a perk to their employees the ability to travel via transportation as a service. Families will save about $5,600 a year in reduced transportation costs. That means gas and it means insurance, which would be equal to about $1 trillion tax cut by 2030. Why is the cost so cheap? The cost largely is so cheap because today's cars are in use 4% of the time. Your car is in a parking lot. It's kind of inefficient right now, right? Normally, you want to be able to have a product be in use a lot. But in this case, your car is not in use a lot. But these transportation as a service, these autonomous vehicles, will be in use as much as possible. Largely, as unless they're charging 100% of the time. EVs, electric vehicles, are much lower maintenance. There are 20 moving parts versus 2,000 for an internal combustion engine. And cars are going to be built to travel 500,000 to 1 million miles. Right now, there's sort of a built-in obsolescence on your vehicle, right? They want you to continue buying. What if the business model of the car companies was a little bit different, right? What if the car companies become transportation as a service fleet operators in addition to building the commodity? Super interesting, right? I think. So what does it mean? First of all, you're going to see cities flip out a little bit because you're going to see lost revenue from gas tax in the states as well. Don't even talk about that at the moment because I know they're battling in Lansing over this. And parking ticket revenues. 5 million jobs gone from drivers. The oil industry, if these are all electric vehicles, that would collapse. And the OEMs making fewer cars. Those are the challenges. The opportunities to figure out how to replace the money for cities, et cetera. But the driver jobs, you could imagine replacement jobs like logistics, maintenance, fleet management, security, et cetera. The oil industry has to shift to renewables or energy independence or some other. There are a lot of them investing in the technology that these cars are representing. And they make fewer cars, so they become, the OEMs, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, perhaps, and this is what they're all thinking about. This is why Ford is doing such a big investment in Southeast Detroit, is that they will own fleets of vehicles, and they will have the technology, the app, to be able to get people from place to place, and they'll also build the cars. Even though there will be fewer of them, they might make more money as a service. So that's trend number one, and this is all anybody can talk about in the Bay Area. There's just so much going on that kind of stuff. Again, that was from a study, so I think it's a bit aggressive. Nonetheless, that was a cutting-edge study that everybody has been pointing to as how quickly some of this might happen. Trend number two, will this automation actually take away our jobs? And so you know that you're going to see replacement jobs, probably not to the same level as they are, but replacement jobs. You've got Ford building a self-driving car factory in Southeast Detroit. You've got Waymo, again, that's from Google, saying that they're going to build cars in Michigan as well. So there's replacement manufacturing jobs. But what I think is most interesting to think about is how technology, the introduction of technology in any sector, affects the job creation in that sector. So this is the classic example that people use, is since ATMs were widely deployed in the late 90s, and everybody was worried that tellers would lose their jobs, and the question is, are there more tellers or fewer tellers since the introduction of the ATM? What do you think? Yeah, because you know where I'm going on this, right? Yeah, since 2000, the number of full-time bank tellers increased 2% per year, but the entire labor force grew just 0.6%. So what's going on under that? What it meant was that the ATMs freed up capital, even though the ATM itself costs money, but the ATM itself freed up capital for banks to be able to invest in more branches, and the tellers now do more complex consumer-facing work. Right? You're not just going inside the bank to deposit a check anymore. You use your ATM, or to withdraw any money, you use your ATM. But the tellers are doing more complex work in more branches. So the actual workforce grew. Same thing, barcode scanners introduced in the 80s what happened to the cashier jobs? They also increased from 1980 to 2013. The cashiers grew even faster rate at 2.1%. Again, same concept is that they free up more place and space for those who own grocery stores to invest in more grocery stores. And that ends up creating more job opportunities. So in the 19th, this is the analogy that people use a lot. So in the 19th century, power looms automated the 98% of the labor needed to weave, and the Luddites wanted to jam up the system. But in fact, the loom increased the number of factory weaving jobs by 400%. Why? Because the cost of a garment dropped. I mean, it used to be you had 2 suits because they were all woven by hand, right? I mean, it's too expensive. But now you go to H&M, if you're my kid, go to H&M, you buy something for $3 and you throw it away practically. It creates more demand for more of this product, whether you think that's a good idea or not, and that's why the number of jobs actually increased over that period. So these are not exceptions. James Besson did a study of 317 occupations where technology had been introduced from 1980 to 2013. And what he found was that employment actually grows significantly more when technology, with sectors that use technology and occupations that use technology. Of all of those 317 jobs, there was only one job that was eliminated by technology. Anybody know what it is? Any guesses? What would have been eliminated? Well, it's along those lines, but it is the noble elevator operator. And even in some places, this guy still exists, as you know. So which actually is encouraging, that technology doesn't have to be a freak out, that technology could actually help us to create more jobs. And the analogy for this is, it's not that you create jobs necessarily inside a factory making cars, but maybe the opportunity is around the ecosystem that the product creates, right? So the Gutenberg printing press is the example. Once they started to print books, there was a demand for books, people got the books, and they realized, hey, not everybody can see this fine print. We need to find glasses. And so on the island of Murano, what is it, outside of Venice, who makes glass? Murano? Yeah, so they got the idea that we should be making bifocals. And that's where bifocals were made. And then people put the glasses together, and they created the telescope and the microscope as a result. So from the Gutenberg printing press, who knew that you would have glasses, telescopes, and microscopes, because you couldn't imagine that sort of outcome from creating a printing press. And that's the point, is that Enrico Moretti, who's a colleague now of mine at Berkeley, he says he's done a whole book on this, on the geography of jobs, and that he says that anytime technology is introduced, it has the potential of creating 5 complementary jobs in the ecosystem that you're not even thinking about. So, huge opportunity as well as a little bit scary. So, all of that sounds great, but the economy issue overall presents a lot of challenges, especially when some technology is introduced. So, equity matters. So, it used to be, we want to create jobs. And now it's, we've got to create jobs that actually allow people to live a good life, right? That actually pay well enough for that. And so, this is disconcerting to a lot of the people in Silicon Valley and across the country. But these Silicon Valley folks are really worried about people coming at them with pitchforks. Top 10 tech billionaires own more wealth than 40% of all Americans. 10 people own more wealth. This is a problem. And the technology that they've created, a lot of these platform technologies like Uber and Lyft and TaxRabbit and you name it, right? Any app that you've got on your phone, that's great, gives people a chance to be, little entrepreneurs. 36% of Americans now participate as workers in the gig economy. That might be they have what is known as a side hustle, or it might be that they have it as a full-time job, and that is only going to get higher, right? And this was a tweet from this from early September that I thought really captured it pretty well, because the Uber founder buys this beautiful LA mansion for $72 million as the drivers are fighting for wages. The Uber drivers forced to sleep in parking lots to make a decent living. This schism is creating massive inequality and massive unrest. You can, globally, if you are in the tech world, if you get a tech degree, globally, and this is a big global number, your global average salary is $135,000. That's a great thing, but what if you're not in tech? What if you're not part of the digital elites, the digital royalty? So this is what's causing income inequality to continue to exacerbate. 40% of Americans, many of you have heard this stat before if you watch any of the talkers on cable TV. I know I've said it a lot. 40% of Americans cannot pay an expense without going into debt for a $400 expense. 40%. 40% of people don't have $400 in the bank account. That's just a massive number, right? It's a massive number. 42% of people have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. We have a huge retirement problem that is looming before us. In Michigan, you know what ALICE is? ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. 43% of employed people in Michigan can't afford the basic necessities, just the basics. And that kind of inequality is really a problem, right? And it's exacerbated by technology. So while I'm bullish on technology, I think that it needs some guardrails. I think there needs to be some policy guardrails to make sure that it's being used properly and that we take advantage of it. I mean, right now, if you have a cell phone, you are a cyborg, right? You use that cell phone for getting places. It makes you better. It makes you able to navigate. It allows you to look stuff up on Google and get you an answer right away, so it enhances you, which is great. Technology should be used to enhance the skills of workers and not to replace them. And so that's the question, is what are the trends relating to thinkers in policy and actors in policy related to this technology? So the latest thinking is really around this gig economy, the platform workers, the Ubers, the Lyfts, et cetera, because those workers in these alternative work arrangements, they're called, those workers are increasing. You see a 57% increase in the rise of alternative work. 94% of the net employment growth in the U.S. economy in the decade between 2005 and 2015 appears to have occurred in alternative work arrangements. That's using the gig economy, right? Where you are not a direct employer and you're not necessarily a contractor. And in fact, these independent workers who work for Uber and Lyft and all those, they are bridging from the traditional employees to the contractors. So the traditional employees have benefits, that's great. They've got health care often, that's great. The contractors have to, buy their health care and their benefits, but the independent workers are kind of in between. And so there's a lot of issues around this huge group, this burgeoning upcoming group of people. California just passed a bill on this. Oregon and Washington are looking at it as well, New Jersey, New York. Issues facing these independent workers, these gig economy workers, that they are unable to organize, they're unable to collectively bargain for wages or benefits, they're not protected by civil rights and anti-discrimination laws, they're unable to receive benefits without being classified as employees under most state laws. And when you think about the benefits, the employers want, this is what they say, that they should have a safe harbor to offer portable benefits to these IWs, independent workers, without being classified as employers. So what do you do about health care, tax withholding, Social Security, unemployment insurance, retirement savings, potentially learning accounts? So there's this whole movement of people who want to see portable benefits. So if I'm not going to be at a same employer all of my life. I want to be able to take my benefits with me. How do you, as somebody who might use Uber or Lyft, you're not paying for their benefits, but many are thinking, well, what if you kicked in a % of your fee to make to pay for this person's portable benefits so that they have some kind of safety net? These are the policy discussions that are happening at least on the coast, and that I know are going to come to Michigan because you guys are we are in such a lead in autonomous vehicles and what that will mean. So trend number 4 is guaranteed subsidized trial employment. So we've got a system now which has people on unemployment, and then if they were working in a manufacturing job that was affected by trade, they have trade adjustment assistance. So there's the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, so they might get some federal retraining dollars. That's the system we have now. But, of course, many of you know, especially those of you who are working in community colleges, et cetera, there's been a whole big push, of course, toward apprenticeships, and using Switzerland, using Germany as an example. In Switzerland, 85% of the Swiss apprentices find a job within 3 months because they are learning on the job, right next to the equipment that they'll be using, right next to people that they will be working with, and they get to size up the employer, and the employer gets to size them up. The apprenticeship model is huge. Closer to home, this is an example of a company, Tectonic. They do a boot camp of software engineers. They take people who aren't software engineers, people who are non-traditional, non-technology people. They train them in how to do software engineering. And then they say, Deloitte wants to hire some software engineers. They'll send in a seasoned person with a team of boot camp folks to learn on the job. And Deloitte gets to decide, do you want to keep them or not? And the people who are going to Deloitte get to decide, do I want to stay here or not? And in this case, 87% of the apprentices were successfully placed in tech jobs. The average salary, $75,000, and 82% of them were from diverse populations. A lot of the tech community, obviously, there's a lot of white guys, and they want to try to diversify, rightly so. And so stuff like this, if you do the right kind of apprenticeship, could give opportunities to all kinds of people, which is exciting. So the question is, right now we spend a ton of money, $24 billion, on unemployment insurance. Is there some thought that some of that might be repurposed to subsidize employment rather than subsidizing unemployment? Subsidize the training period and help to de-risk it for both the employer and the employee. That kind of policy is kind of exciting. The Dean of Harvard University Extension reminds us that we're all going to have, especially the young people coming up, a college graduate today, 30 different jobs, 3 separate careers over their 60-year working life, which is huge. A lot of people in here, my guess, could have been lifers at the company, loyal to the company for a long period of time. That ain't happening anymore. People are looking all the time to ping pong and figure out where they can better get advantage. To me, this is just drives me so crazy, because in the federal government, we got the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program. And here's what they did a study of it. Does it work? Does it work? We should be investing in things that work. But in this case, $11,500 per person, only 37% of those employed participants working in targeted industries 4 years later. That's just not a good record. Why are we continuing to invest in stuff that we know does not work when there are models out there that work? Same thing with the Workforce Investment Act. We spend $10 billion a year on this. 13 to 15 months after enrolling in the study, these job seekers had yet to see their training result in higher employment rates or earnings. Okay, if it's not working, what the heck? Why are we doing it? Let's do something that's different. Let's try subsidizing employment rather than unemployment, or at least experiment with that. That trend is definitely happening across the country. This is the last trend, and then we're going to do some question and answer. So, in this era, when people are talking about universal basic income, which is what Andrew Yang is proposing, he's proposing giving people $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, to offset the impact of technology on jobs and job losses. Great. So, there's some people who like that, some people who don't like it. There is a trend right now of people who are saying, instead of giving somebody $1,000 a month for not, essentially for not doing work, right? How about if you pay people for their data? So right now, data, as everybody says, is the world's most valuable resource, more than oil. Facebook right now, raise your hand if you're on Facebook. Okay, huge number of you, and you are giving away your data. Like every time, every click you are on, you are handing it to Facebook. Facebook is making billions of dollars. Thank you very much from you, because then they can target their ads at you and they can, create a personalized experience, which is something that you might want. But they are selling your data, right, to advertisers so that they can hopefully take advantage of what you have been clicking on. So here's the thought is that you're giving out your data in everything, not just your cell phone, not just your computer, but every time you adjust your thermometer, your thermostat at home, if you have one of the thermostats that's connected to the cloud, same thing with your Fitbit, your car, etc. There's data, it's just ubiquitous. The cloud is getting bigger and bigger. I don't know how it can support all of this data, but it is. And of course, that information is all being used by Facebook. So some folks, I know I wrote this article, so I put this up here, but the idea would be, what if people were paid for their data? And it's a whole movement called data as labor. What if you got some profit sharing for having given away all of your data to Facebook or to Google, et cetera? What if there was a shared opportunity, the billions that they're making? And if you think about it like Alaska has a permanent fund, which is an annual dividend to its citizens based upon their natural resources, $1,600 a person in 2018, but data could be considered a resource, certainly, and the idea would be, what if you were compensated for that? And it's kind of like the Alaska Permanent Fund. There's been a study about how much a family of four would get if AI, if artificial intelligence, ended up being 10% of the U.S. economy. The estimate would be that you might get as much as $20,000 for data. That's a different way of looking at a universal basic income where you're compensated for something specifically. It's an idea that's being talked about across the country, and I have a feeling that there may be further discussion, not just in Michigan, but in other states as well, other than California. Lots of questions about this. How do you value somebody's data? Who would negotiate payments on behalf of people? How to enforce standards and payments? What's the role of government? All of those kind of things would have to be worked out. But the notion is that the current system with technology creating these inequalities is not working, and we need to figure out what the policy responses to it are. So the question for us all right, here's the finish. Who is going to create good-paying jobs for people in an age of automation? Who is going to make sure that our robot overlords do not replace all of us? Who is going to save our people from death and despair? Is it our next president? Whoever that person is. And I meant to put Donald Trump in there. I'm really sorry that I know this is a bipartisan crowd, and I have one with him, and I just forgot it in this, but it really was an oversight. You don't believe me, do you? Is it Gretchen Whitmer? Is it Joan Bauer? Joan, where are you, Joan? I'm so sorry, my photoshopping wasn't really great. It looks like you kind of have a beard. But I'm just thinking of you. Or is it, in fact, all of us that have to do our part to make sure that our economy works for all of us? Thank you so much.